Good morning, friends. I'm glad to be here with you all today. Thank you. And those of you who can't be in this room with us today, you are welcome as well. Our reading this morning is from the book of Luke, chapter 14. Jesus told this story. A certain person was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, an attendant was sent to tell those who had been invited, "Come, for everything is now ready." But they began to make excuses. One said, "I've just bought a field and I must go and see it. Please excuse me." Another said, "I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me." And still another said, "I just got married, so I can't come." This was reported back to the banquet giver, who became angry and said, "Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the hurt, the blind, and the scared." The attendant said, "What you ordered has been done, but there is still room." "Then go out to the roads and the country lanes and compel them to come in so that my house will be full," said the banquet giver. Let us pray. God, who is within us, around us, and in between us, linking us together, open our eyes, our ears, and our hearts to this holy story. Amen. I was invited in. That phrase is central to so many of our most meaningful, hopeful, and life-saving stories. I had nowhere to go, and I was invited in. I was lost, and I was invited in. I felt alone and was invited in. I felt like a stranger, and I was invited in. When have you been invited in? What are your stories about the times that you have been invited in? And these stories, these experiences need not be extraordinary to be important. They need not be extraordinary for them to be life-giving, maybe even life-saving. In fact, sometimes the mundane nature of these invitations is what makes them so exceptional. I was invited to a Thanksgiving dinner by Andy Quiroga when I was newly arrived at grad school in Florida and would have otherwise spent the holiday alone. I was invited into a small shop in Bangalore, India, when the monsoon rains killed our rickshaw and the water and sewage was knee-high. I was invited in to sit on the shoulders of a huge and scary-looking biker guy when I got separated from my dad and godfather at a Cleveland baseball game when I was 8 and we got separated in the crowd. I was invited in to eat meals with my good friend Paulov's Indian family when I was at an age that I needed to have my narrow understandings of the world lovingly widened. I was invited in to conversations with a dying man who shared life. I was invited in. I could go on, and so could you. When were you invited in? When have you been invited in? Share those stories with each other. Share those stories with each other today after the service or this week. What are those moments? Name them. Hold them in gratitude. And if you still know the person who invited you in, thank them. Thank them for that invitation. The parable that we are hearing today centers on this idea of invitation and being invited in. The story describes an invitation to a banquet. And some of those initially invited find excuses to not attend. And so the invitation gets widened to include all those who are not often invited to such banquets. The invitation became wide, and the parable gives its lesson. The banquet is available to all. And in this season of rallying and renewing, we are talking about how we gather together, who is here with us, and why it can be and should be different here. 2 weeks ago, Dwayne began this theme on Rally Sunday, reminding us that we are sufficient, just as we are. We already have enough, and come and give what you can. He said, we bring what we have and we let God use it. Last week, Cynthia brought us into the loving embrace. See, I'm doing the thing she was doing. The loving embrace of the mother hen's wings, of a God who, quote, who so longs for us. And we are allowed to be taken in. We are allowed to be cared for. We are allowed to be loved. This fall, we are reconnecting, returning, renewing, restoring so many re-words. And we get to remember that we have enough and we are abundantly loved just as we are. What gifts to be reminded of. And you are all here today because you are all invited into this place in some way. Maybe you no longer even remember the invitation or how it happened, but you were invited in. Some person, a situation, an idea, a desire, a hope provided an invitation to you, and you have accepted it, and we hope that you continue to accept it. And because I have a microphone and most of you are looking at me, I have the honor of making this invitation really explicit. Wherever you have been, wherever you are going, whoever you are right now, you are invited here. Whether this is your first time or your 500,000th time, you are invited to be a part of this community, of this banquet, and to be fed. But sometimes it's hard to accept invitations, is it not? It is so much easier to stay put sometimes, to hold firm to our habits, to read a book, or to watch TV, or sleep an extra little bit, or do that last little bit of work. My mentor in Chicago, who went to visit lots of churches as her students were preaching, she would always say, when I leave my home, and I leave my coffee in there, and I step over that newspaper, it better be worth it. It is hard to accept invitations. It can be so much easier to want to do it than to actually show up. I may want to do a lot of things. I may want to show up. But sometimes it's a lot easier to not. I may want to do something more than I will actually put in the effort to do it. And these excuses are not a modern phenomenon. We hear in this story, in this parable, that our spiritual ancestors also struggled with this. I wanted to come to the banquet, but I needed to see my new purchase of land tonight. I can't wait. I really did want to show up, but I have these new oxen, and they don't like to be left alone. They're not yet housebroken. Because that's what you do with oxen, right? A little oxen pee pad. I really did want to accept that invitation, but I just got married, and it is so easy to find reasons to not accept invitations. And it is also important for us to remember the moments that you thought of earlier in which you have experienced an invitation and experienced the life-giving nature of accepting an invitation. Not only are we invited to this banquet, but we are also called to do some inviting. We are called to bring in the poor, the hurt, the blind, and the scared. We are called to extend the invitation to those who may not know that they are invited. Not only do we get to look around at who is here, we get to ask who isn't here and why. Who are the others that need to know they are invited and welcomed and loved? They do not need to be perfect or right or one of us, whatever those things mean, to be invited, for the invitation is for all, no matter where they've been, where they're going, or who they are. The naming of the poor, the hurt, the blind, and the scared is both literal and a stand-in. We literally need to invite the poor, the hurt, the blind, and the scared. It is also a stand-in to mean everyone. For if we invite the poor, the hurt, the blind, and the scared, then we have confidence that we have invited everyone on the margins, those who don't know they're invited. But what are we inviting people to? What does this banquet refer to? And is this guy up here telling us that this parable refers to Plymouth Church in Minneapolis? Are you supposed to go out and find people to bring here? Of course, and not at all. A meal or a banquet is common language for the hoped-for community of God. The place that all can come and be fed equally. A banquet is always rooted in abundance, in having enough for all who arrive, no matter what they eat or how hungry they might be. This is what we're being invited into, the hoped-for community that follows God's calling to love God, to love ourselves, and to love the others. This banquet is abundant. And the invitation to this banquet isn't just here at this space at Plymouth Church. This invitation can be found practically anywhere. It is an ethic, a way of living, of treating yourself and others and the world around you. You do not need to be in this space to accept God's invitation. None of my examples involved this space. We here would never be so presumptuous to think that this one place owns God's invitation. Or even that any conception of faith owns the definition of the God who is inviting us. And this place. Plymouth Church in Minneapolis is one place where the banquet is available to you. We are working to be one particular that helps make meaning out of the universal. We are working to be one place in which the invitation to the banquet of God's abundant love can be felt and shared. We are all invited to this table. And we are called to invite others. The invitation is big and wide and abundant. This invitation is love. And this can still feel daunting, I think. What if we invite people and they make excuses and don't show up? What if their oxen are needing them? What if we invite others, they do show up, and then they don't like it? So I wonder, does it help to remember that this is not our table? This is not our table. Whose table is it? It is God's table, not ours. This banquet is not given by me or clergy or a board or you or any church. We are all invited by God to the banquet of God's abundant love. This is just one place where we can give and receive the invitation. We are all strangers and we are all family. None of us own love, but we do carry the responsibility of sharing it and offering welcome, of living it, of inviting others into loving relationship and courageous space, because we are at God's banquet. When have you been invited in? What goodness have you received from the invitations of your life? Each of those moments are instances of the abundant banquet of God. How can you then spread the invitation and create those life-giving moments for others, helping them feel seen and heard and loved and invited just for being who they are? How can you create new instances of the abundant banquet of God? What invitations can you extend? And then how can we do this together? How can we gather in loving community while continuing to make sure that this invitation is sent outside of these walls? How can we make a habit of not forgetting about the poor, the hurt, the blind, and the scared, spreading this banquet's abundant invitation to absolutely everyone? We do it by continually inviting. By inviting again and again and again. And we do it by accepting the invitations when they come to us. By showing up with and for others in loving community. By remembering whose banquet this is. It's not mine. It's not yours. We are being invited to God's banquet table. It is God's banquet table, and it is abundant, and we get to be the hands, the feet, and the voices that help make this table bigger and bigger and bigger. And friends, may we continually make it so.